Notes were taken last week someday. I honestly don't remember which day of the week we finished up this note guide. There's just 2 slides left, so this won't be a super long video. I know you're all super sad about that. But I apologize for the wait. I had some technical issues and wasn't able to record for several days. I apologize for that. But again, if you needed the extra review for these notes, or you were absent and weren't sure where to find them, if you didn't get the notes from another classmate, here those notes are to finish this up, and I'm going to try and go pretty quick because, again, we don't have that much left. So we left things off talking about things like the Compromise of 1850 and how that really played into the idea of popular sovereignty and letting states or territories decide whether or not slavery was going to apply to them. And a lot of the Compromise of 1850, let me just go back a slide really quick because it's been a few days. A lot of the Compromise of 1850 looks like it benefits more of the North compared to the South, right? I mean, I definitely think that's more of the case. However, something that really gets the Southerners in line is it creates, whoops, I'm even back 2 slides. It creates a harsher fugitive slave law, and that's what we just saw on the screen, a way to really crack down not only on runaways themselves and further be able to punish them if they're caught, but to catch and criminalize the people who were white who were also helping slaves escape, or helping them to, potentially change their situation by, teaching them things like how to read and write. Again, this crackdown was supposed to discourage people from helping slaves escape, and it has the opposite effect and gets more people willing to take on those risks. So where we left things from the last time we had notes was part of the Louisiana Purchase is still kind of unclaimed land. It's not a huge settlement area. It's kind of a pass-through area, and it's known as the Kansas-Nebraska Territories, this federal land that we still need to decide what to do with. I apologize. On your note guide, it says it is in 1850, and that is incorrect. It is 1854. Again, it divides what's left of the Louisiana Purchase that's not already divided up into territories or states into either Kansas Territory or Nebraska Territory, to try and encourage people to settle there and make those into states. We're trying for statehood here. Slavery is going to be decided with popular sovereignty after the Compromise of 1850. Pretty much any federal land, any territory on its way to statehood is going to use that majority rules mentality to decide whether the states that come out of that territory will use slavery or not. And this officially gets rid of the Missouri Compromise line. The Compromise of 1850 kind of does that, but the Kansas-Nebraska Act, by falling into that popular sovereignty bucket, is kind of saying we're done following that rule. And it's going to cause problems. This idea of popular sovereignty on paper sounds great. Why wouldn't you want to go with majority rules? And that way you have a bulk of a population already agreeing to do one thing. It's going to cause problems, and it's going to really cause problems in Kansas Territory. It's a little more populated than Nebraska Territory. It's a little closer to statehood than Nebraska Territory is at this point. It's going to become so bad in the Kansas Territory that it's called Bleeding Kansas. Okay, that does not mean it was fun snuggles and party time. It was bad. Again, popular sovereignty, majority rules, will all depend on how the vote turns out. How do you find majority rules? You take a vote. Okay, if that's true in the government, that's true when you're trying to decide what topping you want on your pizza. Okay, you go with what most of the group wants. What that's going to mean in terms of Kansas Territory is that voter fraud, way to kind of cheat the system, is going to happen. Okay, voter fraud took on a couple of different forms. The most common was along the Kansas Territory border, where people who didn't live in Kansas Territory would hop the border and ride to the nearest town and say they lived in Kansas and cast a vote for or against slavery, depending on which side of the debate they were on, and then hop on back over the border and go home. It was sparsely enough populated that you didn't necessarily know all of your neighbors. Your closest town might not be big enough to hold a ballot box, so you might have to go 2 towns over or 3 towns over, so you wouldn't necessarily know every single person stopping to cast a vote, which is part of why people got away with this. Sometimes voter fraud is intimidating other people out of voting one way. If you're from parts of Kansas Territory, we're pretty quickly divided into a pro-slavery town or anti-slavery town. And so sometimes someone coming in from, again, a different town might feel a little differently than you. And so you might try and get some buddies together and intimidate them and stand right next to them when they went to go place their ballot. So you knew exactly what they were voting for. This is, again, before the days of anonymous voting and all of that, and making intimidating voters a crime, or any kind of campaigning at the ballot box is not legal today. That all counts as voter fraud, trying to change the vote in some way. When voter fraud continues to become an issue and leads to more divisiveness, because it's a neck and neck race, both sides of the slavery debate will import or ship, anyway, maybe not import, but they are going to ship arms, meaning weapons, to Kansas. So we know that there's intent to cause harm here. You don't buy guns, just in case. People are planning essentially for war here. A pro-slavery mob, things are really going to blow up here when a pro-slavery mob enter the anti-slavery town of Lawrence, Kansas. Okay, Lawrence, Kansas is home to a printing press that is printing out an anti-slavery newspaper. So they're a pretty big town that's very anti-slavery, and they're very vocal about being anti-slavery. And this mob, we didn't really talk about this in class, but the people who attack these mobs were called border ruffians, or sometimes they were called what was the word? Bushwhackers is the word I'm looking for. That meant you were pro-slavery. But anyway, they go into Lawrence, Kansas, and they destroy property. They break windows, they put graffiti on walls, they knock things over, drag things through the streets. And that also means they are setting fire to things. They are causing damage. They're causing dangerous damage. And unfortunately, some civilians are going to get trapped in some of the buildings that are set on fire and will die. This damage was so bad, it was called a sack. A sack is a really old kind of tactic vocab term, and it meant that a conquering army essentially would ride into an area that they conquered or were trying to conquer and just destroy whatever they could to try and get the other side to kind of bow down and accept them. And that's what these people are trying to do in Lawrence. The damage is so bad, it's called the sack of Lawrence, or it was, they tried to conquer Lawrence. And this is going to have its own negative outcome. A famous abolitionist, and this is a word I've talked about a few times, but I don't know that we've actually seen it used before, and it's something we'll talk about next unit a little bit more. An abolitionist here, this A word at the beginning, is someone who wants to completely get rid of slavery in the United States or somewhere that uses slavery. There was a pretty big abolitionist movement in the United Kingdom before they got rid of slavery, a few decades before the United States did. So an abolitionist wants to abolish, that's where that word comes from, slavery. They don't want slaves to be brought in from another country. They don't want them traded back and forth from plantation to plantation. They think everyone in the country should be free. Maybe not necessarily equal, but at least free. Okay. John Brown is a famous American abolitionist because he goes to the extreme. A lot of people think of abolitionists as being very peaceful, almost Quaker-like, and there were plenty of Quaker abolitionists. John Brown is not one of these kind of fluffy, abolitionists that a lot of people think abolitionists were. He was kind of like Nat Turner, if you remember talking about the Nat Turner Rebellion, where he thought he was put on the face of the planet to end slavery. Again, not a terrible plan, but he thought he needed to end slavery by whatever means necessary. And if that meant getting dirty and getting bloody and getting violent, that was what he was going to do. His response when he hears about the sack of Lawrence, he is not from Lawrence, Kansas, but when he hears about what happened in Lawrence, he and a few of his sons get together. They're angry and they decide to fight fire with fire. That is something John Brown is said to have said. That's not just me trying to explain a point. And they attack some neighboring people, some neighboring houses. And they end up killing 5 men who are pro-slavery. Some of these men were related and some of these were not related to each other, not to John Brown. None of them were related to John Brown, who died. But 5 men end up dead. This is called the Pottawatomie Massacre because it happened along Pottawatomie Creek, not Pottawatomie County. This is not something that happened where we live, not too far from where we live in, retrospect, but it's not like it happened right next door. This is only kind of the beginning of John Brown and his militant, violent crusade against slavery. We will talk more about John Brown and some of the other things he's responsible for doing in our next little mini unit. Our next unit is much shorter than this unit, but this is where we're going to end notes. I told you we didn't have much left. I've already talked longer than I want to, so I'm going to get off the video so I can upload it to YouTube because it's several days later than I wanted you to have it. If you have questions, I know I went fast. Rewatch, then send emails or talk to me before and after class. I will see you some other time. Have an excellent day, and I will see you